The morning sun cast a golden glow over Lincoln Elementary as the school bell rang. Children hurried through the gates, their laughter echoing in the crisp air. Among them walked a small, quiet boy named Ethan Cole. His backpack was old, the color faded, and his shoes were worn from too many walks. He held them together with tape, yet he carried himself with calm dignity. He didn't speak much, but there was something deep in his eyes, a quiet strength that most couldn't see. It was his first day at this new school. Ethan had just moved to town with his mother. His father, he mentioned once to his mother, was away doing something important. The other kids didn't know that yet, but in a few hours, they would start whispering, and those whispers would soon turn into laughter. Ethan entered the classroom, clutching his notebook tightly. The room buzzed with chatter until the teacher, Ms. Parker, walked in. She was in her mid-30s, confident, and known for her strict tone and sharp words. She prided herself on discipline, but sometimes her pride came mixed with judgment. When her eyes fell on Ethan, she quickly noticed his appearance, the unpolished shoes, the second-hand shirt, the timid look. "Good morning, class," she said firmly. "We have a new student today. Let's welcome Ethan Cole." A few students clapped lazily, while some just stared. Ethan stood at the front, nervous. Ms. Parker folded her arms and gave him a polite but cold smile. "Ethan, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself?" Ethan hesitated, his voice soft. "My name is Ethan. I like drawing and science. And my dad works for the government." Her eyebrow lifted. "Oh, really? And what does he do there?" Ethan looked down, unsure how much to say. "He's in a special unit. He can't talk about it much." The classroom fell silent for a second, then a few kids snickered. One boy at the back whispered loudly, "Yeah right, special unit, like a superhero?" The class burst into laughter. Even Ms. Parker couldn't hide her smirk. "Well, that's quite a story," she said, pretending to write something on the board. "Maybe one day we'll see your famous father walk into class, right?" Ethan's face turned red. He didn't reply. He quietly walked to the last seat in the row, trying not to let his tears show. The laughter faded, but the embarrassment stayed. For the rest of the morning, Ethan kept to himself, his eyes glued to his desk. At lunch, the teasing got worse. A group of boys cornered him near the cafeteria. "Hey, Agent Ethan," one of them mocked. "Is your dad in the FBI or the CIA?" Another boy added, "Maybe he's an astronaut. Or maybe he doesn't even exist." They laughed and walked away. Ethan just stood there, clutching his lunchbox, the food untouched. He sat alone under a tree outside the school. A breeze brushed through his hair, carrying the faint sounds of children playing. He opened his lunch slowly, staring at the sandwich his mom had packed. It wasn't much, but it was made with care. He took a small bite, blinking fast to stop the tears. "It's okay," he whispered to himself. Dad said people laugh at what they don't understand. When the final bell rang, Ethan was the last to leave the classroom. Ms. Parker noticed him standing quietly, waiting by the window. She sighed and said, "You can go home now, Ethan. School's over." He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I'm just waiting for my dad." Ms. Parker gave a small laugh. "Of course you are," she said softly under her breath, not realizing he heard her. A few minutes later, a small car pulled up, not a fancy one, just a modest sedan. Ethan's mother stepped out, smiling tiredly. She waved, and Ethan's face brightened instantly. He ran to her, hugged her tightly, and they walked away together. Ms. Parker watched from the window, shaking her head slightly. "Poor boy," she muttered. "Such imagination." That night, while doing his homework, Ethan heard the phone ring. His mother picked it up, her voice instantly changing, more formal, more serious. "Yes, David," she said softly. "He's doing fine. He misses you. She paused, listening carefully. Be safe out there, okay? Ethan looked up from his notebook, his heart lifting at the sound of his father's name. He whispered, I told you they don't believe me, Dad, but one day they'll know. The next morning, Ethan walked into school with the same quiet strength. He sat in the same seat, ignored the same whispers, but something about his eyes had changed, a tiny spark of determination now lived there. Ms. Parker gave him a worksheet and said, Try your best, Ethan. She didn't mean harm, but her tone carried the same disbelief. During science class, she asked the students to name different professions that help protect people. Police officers, said one. Firefighters, said another. Doctors, added a girl. Ethan raised his hand quietly. Yes, Ethan? He replied, Special Forces officers. They protect everyone too. The class went silent for a moment, then laughter filled the room again. Ms. Parker sighed. Ethan, maybe you should focus on realistic answers, she said with a smile that wasn't kind. Ethan didn't respond this time. He simply said, One day, you'll see him, and went back to writing. Something in his voice was calm but certain, and it left the room strangely quiet for a few seconds. Even Ms. Parker felt something shift in her chest, a small flicker of doubt or curiosity, she couldn't tell. As the day ended, dark clouds rolled in. The wind howled softly outside the windows. Ms. Parker locked the classroom and noticed Ethan once again standing by the gate, his eyes fixed far down the road. Your mom's late again? She asked. Ethan shook his head slightly. Not today. I think Dad's coming. Ms. Parker chuckled. Is that so? She said, walking past him. Well, I'll believe it when I see it. Ethan watched her leave. The sky rumbled above, and a small smile appeared on his lips. You will, he whispered to himself. You will. The next morning would change everything. The next day began with a soft drizzle, the kind that made the schoolyard smell like wet chalk and rain-soaked grass. Ethan walked through the gate with his head up, clutching his backpack tightly. The moment he stepped inside, he felt the eyes of the other students turn toward him again. Whispering voices followed him down the hallway like a shadow. That's the kid who said his dad's in a special unit, one girl giggled. Yeah, another replied, maybe he's a superhero or a spy. The laughter trailed behind him until he disappeared into the classroom. Ms. Parker stood at the front, marking papers. She glanced up as Ethan entered, her lips curving into a polite smile. Morning, Ethan, she said. Her tone wasn't unkind, but it carried that faint trace of mockery, the kind that hides behind a teacher's smile. Ethan nodded quietly and sat in his usual seat at the back. When class began, Ms. Parker decided to start with introductions again, a way to help everyone get comfortable. She asked each student to share something about their family. When it was Ethan's turn, the class grew quiet. They were waiting. Ethan took a deep breath. My dad, he works for the government. He's in a special unit. A low wave of laughter rolled through the room. One boy called out, Oh yeah? Is he James Bond? Another said, maybe he fights aliens. The whole class erupted. Enough! Ms. Parker said with a laugh of her own, trying to sound like she was keeping order. Let's not tease him, children. Then she added with a smirk, I'm sure his father is very special. The class chuckled again. Ethan looked down, pretending to write something in his notebook. His pencil trembled in his hand. During recess, the teasing grew worse. The same group of boys who had mocked him before gathered around his table in the cafeteria. Their leader, a tall boy named Ryan, leaned close and said, So, Ethan, what kind of secret stuff does your dad do? Fly helicopters? Catch bad guys? Ethan stayed silent, trying to eat. Ryan grabbed his apple and tossed it across the table. What's wrong? Cat got your tongue, agent boy? Ethan's eyes met Ryan's. They weren't angry, just tired. You don't have to believe me, he said quietly. One day, you'll see. Ryan laughed. Yeah, sure. Maybe he'll parachute into the schoolyard at lunch. The table roared with laughter. Ms. Parker, standing by the cafeteria door, saw the group but didn't step in. She told herself, kids tease each other all the time. That evening, Ethan sat by the window at home, staring into the dark sky. His mother entered with 2 mugs of cocoa and placed one beside him. Rough day again? She asked softly. Ethan nodded. They don't believe me, Mom, he said. They think I make up stories about Dad. His mother sighed, brushing his hair back gently. Let them think what they want, she said. You know who your father is. That's what matters. He looked up at her. But why can't he just come home? Just once. So they'll see. She smiled sadly. Because his job isn't like other jobs. He goes where others can't, to keep people safe. Sometimes the bravest people have to stay hidden. Ethan nodded, still staring out the window. He said he'd come when the time was right. The next morning, the air in class was tense. Ms. Parker was grading papers when the door suddenly opened. It was the principal, Mr. Hayes. Ms. Parker, he said, can I see you for a moment? She followed him into the hallway. Everything all right? She asked. He sighed. I got a call from a man claiming to be Ethan Cole's father. Said he might stop by the school soon. Didn't say when, but he sounded official. Official? Ms. Parker frowned. You think it's real? Mr. Hayes shrugged. Could be. Or maybe the boy asked someone to pretend. Kids make up stories. Ms. Parker smiled faintly. Well, if he's as special as Ethan says, I guess we'll find out soon. When she returned to class, she caught Ethan watching her curiously. Everything okay, Ms. Parker? He asked. She gave him a thin smile. Yes, Ethan. Everything's fine. After lunch, it began to rain again. The sky turned gray, and thunder rolled in the distance. The students were restless, tapping pencils and whispering. Ms. Parker decided to give them an art project, Draw Your Family. It was meant to be fun, but everyone knew it was another chance to make fun of Ethan. When she walked past his desk, she saw his drawing, a man in uniform standing tall beside a flag. The details were simple but strong, the man's face serious, his posture proud. Is that your father? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Ethan nodded. Yes, ma'am. She studied the picture for a moment. It's interesting. Very dramatic. He smiled softly. That's how he really is. The class began sharing their drawings. When Ethan's turn came, he stood at the front, holding his paper carefully. This is my dad, he said. He helps people when they're in danger. He's not home much, but he promised he'll come soon. The room was silent for a heartbeat, then laughter broke out again. Oh, come on! Ryan shouted. That's just a soldier from a movie. Ethan stayed quiet. Ms. Parker shook her head slightly. All right, everyone, settle down. Thank you, Ethan. You can sit. He returned to his seat, folding his drawing slowly. Something in his eyes had changed, not sadness anymore, but a quiet kind of resolve. After class, Ms. Parker noticed he stayed behind again, watching the rain hit the windows. Waiting for your dad? She asked, her tone half joking. Ethan didn't look away from the window. Yes, ma'am. She smiled faintly. Ethan, sometimes it's okay to dream, but you can't live in your imagination forever. He turned to her with a calm voice. I'm not dreaming, Ms. Parker. He's coming. Maybe not today, but soon. She didn't know why, but something in his voice sent a small chill down her spine. When Ethan finally left, the classroom felt strangely quiet. Ms. Parker stood by the window, watching him walk down the path, his small figure disappearing into the misty rain. For reasons she couldn't explain, she whispered to herself, "What if he's telling the truth?" That night, thunder shook the sky again. Somewhere outside town, headlights cut through the darkness as a black SUV sped down the road. Inside sat a man in uniform, his eyes sharp, his hands steady on the wheel. A badge gleamed on his chest, Special Forces. He looked at the picture of a small boy taped to his dashboard and whispered, "I'm coming, buddy." The next day, everything would change forever. Rain poured down hard that morning, painting the world outside in shades of gray. The schoolyard was soaked, and puddles rippled under the footsteps of children running for cover. Inside Lincoln Elementary, the halls smelled faintly of wet paper and chalk. Ethan walked quietly through the corridor, water dripping from his jacket. He kept his head low, but his mind was somewhere far away, thinking about the voice he had heard last night. His father's voice. He had called briefly, saying only one thing before the line went dead, "I'll be there soon, son." The words kept echoing in Ethan's mind as he took his seat at the back of the classroom. Ms. Parker stood near the board, drying her umbrella and shuffling through lesson notes. She glanced at Ethan for a second, then looked away. Something about him made her uneasy these days. The way he stared out the window, calm and patient, as if he knew something the rest of them didn't. The morning dragged on with math lessons and restless students. The rain kept beating against the glass, filling the room with a soft, steady rhythm. Every few minutes, Ethan's eyes flicked toward the school gate visible from the classroom window. Ms. Parker noticed. "Ethan," she said, tapping her pen on the desk, "please try to focus." "Yes, ma'am," he replied politely. But his gaze still drifted. At lunch, Ryan and his group found their way to Ethan's table again. "Still waiting for your secret agent, Dad?" Ryan mocked, biting into his sandwich. "Maybe he's stuck fighting aliens in space." Ethan didn't reply. He just looked at him and said quietly, "You'll see." Ryan laughed so hard he almost spilled his drink. "Yeah, right. Sure thing, Agent Cole." The bell rang for afternoon class. As students took their seats again, something strange happened. The sound of tires screeching outside broke through the rain. The noise drew everyone's attention. Ms. Parker frowned and walked toward the window. Outside, at the gate, a large black SUV had just pulled up. Its tinted windows reflected the gray sky. The engine shut off, and for a moment, everything was still. Then the driver's door opened. A tall man stepped out, dressed in a dark uniform with a badge glinting faintly on his chest. Even from the second-floor classroom, his presence was commanding, calm, powerful, silent. He walked straight to the entrance, rain sliding off his jacket. The classroom buzzed with whispers. "Who's that? Is it a police officer? Maybe someone's in trouble." Ms. Parker turned away from the window. "All right, class, let's settle down. It's probably nothing." But her voice sounded uncertain. Minutes later, the intercom crackled. "Ms. Parker," said the principal's voice, "could you please come to the office? Bring Ethan Cole with you." The class gasped. All eyes turned toward Ethan. He froze, his pencil slipping from his fingers. Ryan leaned forward and whispered, "Told you, he's in trouble." But Ethan just stood up calmly, his expression unreadable. "Yes, ma'am," he said, following Ms. Parker out of the classroom. The hallway felt longer than usual. The sound of the rain outside was louder now, beating against the windows like a drum. When they reached the principal's office, the door was half open. Inside stood Principal Hayes, looking uneasy, and beside him was the man from the SUV. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a black tactical jacket with a patch that read Special Forces Division. His boots were wet, his face lined with exhaustion but alive with strength. He turned when he heard footsteps. Ethan froze in the doorway. Dad? The man's stern face softened instantly. Hey, buddy. His voice was deep and calm, the kind of voice that filled the whole room. Ms. Parker blinked in shock. Wait, this is your father? The man extended his hand politely. Major David Cole, ma'am. United States Special Forces. Principal Hayes stammered. He showed me identification, everything checks out. He's the real deal. Ms. Parker felt her face flush. Her throat went dry as memories of her laughter and disbelief rushed back. He was telling the truth. Ethan stepped forward and hugged his father tightly. I told them you'd come, he whispered. Major Cole smiled faintly and looked down at him. And I told you I always keep my promises. Ms. Parker cleared her throat awkwardly. Major Cole, I didn't realize. He raised a hand gently. It's all right. Most people don't believe what they can't see. Ethan looked up at his teacher. Can Dad come to my class? He asked eagerly. Ms. Parker hesitated, then nodded slowly. Of course. When they entered the classroom, a wave of silence swept through the students. The man's uniform gleamed under the fluorescent lights, his boots echoing against the floor. Every kid who had mocked Ethan stared in stunned silence. Ryan's smirk vanished completely. Ms. Parker stood beside him awkwardly. Class, she said softly, this is Ethan's father, Major Cole. Major Cole looked around, his voice calm but firm. Good afternoon. The room seemed to shrink around him. I've heard some of you had doubts about my boy here. No one dared to speak. He continued, my job keeps me far from home. I can't always tell people where I go or what I do. Sometimes, that makes it easy for others to assume things. But I want you all to remember something, truth doesn't need to be shouted to be real. The students sat motionless. Even Ms. Parker felt a lump forming in her throat. Major Cole turned to his son and rested a hand on his shoulder. You see, Ethan, people will laugh when they don't understand. But you don't have to prove anything to them. Just keep doing what's right. Ethan nodded, his eyes shining. For a moment, the classroom was filled with nothing but quiet awe. Then, from the back of the room, Ryan finally spoke, his voice small. I'm sorry, Ethan. Ethan looked at him and smiled kindly. It's okay. Ms. Parker swallowed hard and stepped forward. Major Cole, thank you for coming. I think we all needed to hear that. He gave a respectful nod. We're all teachers in one way or another, ma'am. The bell rang, but no one moved. The students just watched as Major Cole shook the principal's hand and walked toward the door. As he stepped outside, the rain had stopped. A single ray of sunlight broke through the clouds, lighting the wet ground like gold. Ethan followed him to the gate, holding his father's hand tightly. You'll come back, right? He asked. Major Cole smiled down at him. Always, son. Always. Inside the classroom, Ms. Parker stood by the window, watching them walk away. For the first time in years, she felt truly speechless. Her mind replayed every moment she had laughed at Ethan, every cruel word she had said without thinking. She whispered softly to herself, I judged what I could see, not what was real. The rain started again, light and gentle this time, almost like a blessing. But deep down, Ms. Parker knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning of a lesson she would never forget. The next morning, sunlight finally returned to Lincoln Elementary. The rain had washed everything clean, the air smelled new, the sky was wide and blue, and the puddles sparkled like mirrors across the playground. But inside the school, something else had changed. Whispers about what happened the day before spread through every hallway, from the youngest students to the oldest teachers. Everyone was talking about Ethan Cole, the quiet boy they used to laugh at. Did you see his dad yesterday? One boy said, his voice filled with excitement. He was wearing a real uniform. My brother said he saw his car, all black, like in those military movies, another added. And Ms. Parker looked so pale, a girl giggled softly. She didn't say a word. By the time Ethan reached class, he could feel the difference. The same eyes that once mocked him now watched with a strange kind of respect and curiosity. But Ethan didn't seem proud or angry. He just walked in quietly, gave a small smile, and took his usual seat at the back. Ms. Parker stood at her desk, pretending to review her notes, but her mind was elsewhere. She had barely slept last night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ethan's face when his father walked into the room, the calm pride in his eyes, the way truth had silenced everyone. She felt a heavy guilt sitting deep in her chest. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. "Good morning, class." "Good morning, Ms. Parker," they replied in unison, though the usual energy in their tone was gone. Everyone seemed to sense the tension that lingered in the room. Ms. Parker looked at Ethan. "Ethan, your father, he mentioned yesterday that he might come again today to talk to the students." Ethan nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "Yes, ma'am. He said he wanted to share something important." The room went silent for a moment. Ryan, who used to lead the teasing, looked down at his desk, his cheeks turning red. Before Ms. Parker could say another word, the classroom door opened. Standing there once again was Major David Cole, wearing his crisp uniform, polished boots, and a calm, steady expression. The class instantly stood up, their eyes wide. Even Ms. Parker took a nervous step back. "Good morning," Major Cole said, his voice deep but warm. "Please, sit." The students obeyed instantly. The room was so quiet that even the ticking of the wall clock could be heard. Ms. Parker gestured for him to come in. "Major Cole, it's an honor to have you here again." He nodded politely. "Thank you, ma'am. I won't take much of your class time, but I'd like to share something with your students, something that might help them understand the value of truth, respect, and humility." He turned to the students, his gaze steady yet kind. "Yesterday, when I walked into this school, I saw more than a classroom. I saw how quickly people can judge others, by their clothes, by their words, by what they think someone's family is or isn't. My son, Ethan, told the truth. But no one believed him, because the truth didn't fit their picture." The children listened silently, every word sinking deep. Major Cole continued, "In my job, I've met people from every walk of life, some rich, some poor, some who had nothing but courage. And I've learned one thing: the size of a person's heart matters more than the size of their wallet." Ms. Parker lowered her eyes, shame filling her heart. He looked toward her gently. "Teachers hold great power, ma'am. They can build a child up or break him down. Yesterday, my son came home and said he forgave you. That means he's already stronger than most adults I've met." A quiet gasp rippled through the class. Ms. Parker's lips trembled slightly. She looked at Ethan, his calm, forgiving face made her eyes sting. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Ethan. I'm truly sorry." Ethan gave a small, understanding nod. "It's okay, ma'am. Dad says people can change when they see the truth." Major Cole smiled faintly. "He's right. Truth has a way of walking into a room when you least expect it." He then turned back to the students. "Every one of you sitting here has the power to be someone great. Not by pretending, not by mocking others, but by believing in yourself and in others. Respect everyone. You never know what battles they're fighting." The room fell into a respectful silence. Even Ryan, who once couldn't stop laughing, now sat with his head bowed. "Do any of you have questions?" Major Cole asked. A small hand went up. It was a girl named Lily. "Sir, were you ever scared doing your job?" she asked shyly. He smiled gently. "Yes, Lily. Fear is something we all feel. But courage doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you move forward even when you are." The class nodded, their young minds absorbing every word like it was gold. After a few more questions, Major Cole looked at his watch. I have to go now. Duty calls. He turned to Ms. Parker and shook her hand respectfully. Thank you for allowing me this time. She nodded quickly, her voice barely steady. No, Major Cole, thank you. I think we all learned more today than from any book. As he turned to leave, Ethan stood up and hugged him tightly. I'll miss you, Dad. Major Cole smiled down at him. Be good, son. Remember, your truth is your strength. And then he left. The heavy sound of his boots faded down the hall until the door closed behind him. For a few long seconds, no one spoke. The silence in the room wasn't empty, it was filled with understanding, with reflection. Then Ms. Parker finally turned to the class. Let's give Ethan a round of applause, she said softly. For being brave enough to tell the truth. The entire class clapped, not out of pity, but out of respect. Ethan's face turned red, but this time from happiness. Ryan got up from his seat and walked to Ethan's desk. I'm sorry for everything, he said quietly. You were right all along. Ethan smiled and extended his hand. It's okay, Ryan. By the end of the day, the story of Ethan and his father had spread beyond the school, to teachers, parents, even neighbors. People spoke about the boy who never argued, never shouted, but still proved everyone wrong. That evening, Ms. Parker sat alone at her desk long after the last student had gone. The golden sunset filtered through the windows, turning the room warm and quiet. She stared at Ethan's empty chair and whispered to herself, sometimes, the smallest voice carries the biggest truth. She looked out at the horizon, where the last light faded behind the hills, and smiled softly. Thank you, Ethan, she said under her breath. You didn't just teach your classmates today, you taught me, too. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain and sunlight together, a strange but beautiful mix, just like the lesson she'd learned. The following day began with a calm stillness in the air, the kind that comes after a storm has passed. The school grounds looked fresh and alive, the leaves glistening in the morning light. Birds chirped near the windows as if the world itself wanted to start over. Inside the classroom, Ms. Parker arranged her books neatly, her mind still replaying the events of the past 2 days. She had barely eaten or slept, not because of guilt alone, but because something deep inside her had shifted. For the first time in years, she had looked beyond test scores and report cards, beyond neat uniforms and perfect shoes. She had seen the power of truth, and how wrong she'd been to judge a child by what he wore. The bell rang, and the classroom filled with the sound of footsteps and chatter. But it wasn't the usual laughter. The students were quieter, more thoughtful. When Ethan walked in, the noise dropped to silence. Every head turned to him, not to mock, but out of respect. Ms. Parker smiled genuinely this time. Good morning, Ethan. He smiled back. Good morning, ma'am. As the class began, a knock came on the door. Everyone turned. The door opened, and there he was again, Major David Cole, standing tall in his uniform. The sunlight from the window glinted off his medals. His presence filled the room instantly, calm yet powerful. Ms. Parker blinked, surprised but pleased. Major Cole. We weren't expecting you today. He nodded politely. I was passing through on my way to the base. Thought I'd stop by for a few minutes, if that's all right. Of course, Ms. Parker said quickly, motioning him in. You're always welcome here. The students whispered excitedly, sitting straighter in their seats. Ryan even fixed his collar. Major Cole smiled faintly at Ethan before turning to face the class. I know you all have a busy day, but I wanted to share something important. Yesterday, you heard me talk about truth. Today, I want to talk about respect. The classroom grew quiet again. He began walking slowly between the rows of desks. Respect, he said, is not just about saying sir or ma'am. It's about how you treat people when no one's watching. It's about listening before you laugh, understanding before you judge. The students hung on to every word. He paused beside Ryan's desk. I know sometimes it's easy to follow the crowd, to laugh when others laugh, to tease when others do. But real strength isn't in following. It's in standing alone when you know something's wrong. Ryan lowered his eyes. Yes, sir, he said quietly. Major Cole smiled kindly and patted his shoulder. That's how leaders are made. He continued, when I'm on a mission, I don't ask where a soldier came from or what he owns. I only ask, will he stand by me when it matters? That's the kind of people the world needs. The ones who choose courage and kindness. Ethan watched his father with admiration. He had always known this side of him, the gentle strength, the quiet authority, but seeing others finally understand made him feel proud in a way he never had before. Ms. Parker stood near her desk, her eyes glistening. She hadn't realized she was smiling until Major Cole turned to her. Ms. Parker, he said respectfully, teachers are the first leaders a child meets. They shape how children see the world. You hold more power than anyone in uniform. She nodded, her voice trembling slightly. You're right, Major. And I think I needed that reminder. He gave a soft smile. We all need reminders sometimes. Then, turning to the students again, he asked, who can tell me what they've learned from all this? A girl raised her hand. That we shouldn't laugh at people without knowing their story. Excellent, Major Cole said. Anyone else? Ryan lifted his hand hesitantly. That truth doesn't need to be loud to be real, he said. Major Cole nodded proudly. Exactly. He stepped back toward the front of the class. And one more thing, never be ashamed of where you come from. The world will try to label you, to make you feel small. But your value isn't written on your clothes or your report cards. It's in your heart. Ethan smiled. His classmates looked at him with a kind of respect they'd never shown anyone before. Ms. Parker took a deep breath, her voice warm now. Class, let's thank Major Cole for teaching us something far beyond the books. The students clapped, not out of obligation, but from genuine admiration. The sound filled the room, echoing like applause in a theater. Major Cole turned to leave but stopped by Ethan's desk. Keep being strong, son. You've already made me proud. Ethan's eyes shone. I'll try my best, Dad. I know you will, Major Cole said softly. As he walked out, sunlight poured through the door, lighting the classroom in a warm glow. The students watched silently until the door closed behind him. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Ms. Parker said, All right, everyone. Let's take out our journals. I want you to write about what respect means to you, not what the dictionary says, but what you feel it means after today. The students bent over their notebooks, pens moving quickly. Ryan glanced at Ethan and smiled. Hey, he whispered, your dad's really cool. Ethan grinned. Yeah, he is. As they wrote, Ms. Parker stood by the window, watching the SUV pull away in the distance. The sound of the engine faded, but his words stayed in her mind. She looked at the class, the same faces that once mocked, now thoughtful, inspired. In that moment, she understood something deeper. Education wasn't just about lessons or grades. It was about shaping hearts. The rest of the day passed quietly, peacefully. When the final bell rang, Ethan lingered for a moment, packing his bag slowly. Ethan, Ms. Parker called gently. Your father would be proud of you. You've taught us more than you realize. He smiled. He always says the same thing about you, ma'am. Her eyes softened. Thank you, Ethan. He waved and left, his small figure walking toward the sunlight. Ms. Parker watched until he disappeared down the path, her heart full of something she hadn't felt in years, hope. Outside, the sky glowed gold, and a light breeze swept through the trees. It felt like a new beginning, not just for Ethan, but for everyone who had learned what true respect really meant. The weekend came and went, but Ms. Parker couldn't shake the thoughts that haunted her mind. Every time she tried to relax, she saw Ethan's calm eyes, his father's steady words, and the quiet way truth had humbled her entire class. She'd replayed that moment again and again, the moment she realized she had failed as a teacher, not in lessons, but in humanity. On Monday morning, she stood in front of her bathroom mirror, staring at her reflection. She didn't look like the confident woman who had once prided herself on being the best teacher in Lincoln Elementary. Now, her eyes carried the weight of reflection and remorse. She whispered softly, "It's time to make things right." When she arrived at school, the halls were already buzzing. Children ran past her, laughing, shouting, innocent and carefree. But as she entered her classroom, the energy shifted. The students had changed since that day. They spoke to each other more kindly, they helped one another with homework, and they listened when someone talked. Ethan's quiet strength had changed more than just her, it had changed everyone. Ethan was already seated at his desk, reading a small, worn-out book. His backpack was patched in a few places, but neatly kept. Ms. Parker smiled softly and walked over. "Good morning, Ethan," she said gently. He looked up and smiled. "Good morning, ma'am." She hesitated for a second before speaking again. "Ethan, could you ask your father if I could speak with him today after school? Just for a few minutes." Ethan blinked, surprised. "Of course, ma'am. I'll tell him." "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet. The rest of the day moved slowly. Ms. Parker tried to focus on lessons, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She kept wondering what she'd say to Major Cole. How do you apologize to a man whose child you humiliated? How do you make peace with your own guilt? When the final bell rang, students packed up and rushed out. The golden afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows. Ms. Parker stayed behind, her heart pounding. She cleaned her desk for the 5th time, just to distract herself. Then came a knock at the door. She looked up, and there he was. Major David Cole stood at the entrance, calm and composed as ever. "Ms. Parker," he greeted, stepping in. "Ethan said you wanted to talk?" She nodded quickly, trying to find her voice. "Yes, Major. Thank you for coming." He nodded once, waiting patiently. Ms. Parker took a deep breath. "I wanted to apologize, properly. That day, I made a terrible mistake. I judged Ethan without listening, without believing in him. I let my own assumptions control my words. And I hurt your son deeply." Her voice cracked slightly, but she continued, "I've been a teacher for 10 years, Major. I thought I understood children, but Ethan taught me more in 1 week than I learned in a decade." Major Cole remained quiet, his eyes thoughtful. She looked down, ashamed. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to say it, to you, and to him." There was a long silence. Then, Major Cole spoke softly. "Ms. Parker, my job teaches me a lot about people. I've seen men make mistakes, big ones, but what matters is what they do after. You faced what you did wrong, and that takes courage." He stepped closer, his tone kind. "Ethan told me he forgave you the same day it happened. Children have a way of seeing hearts more clearly than we adults do." Tears welled in her eyes. "He did," she whispered. "And that's what hurt the most, his kindness when I didn't deserve it." Major Cole smiled faintly. "Maybe that kindness is exactly what you needed." She nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "It was," she finally said. "He reminded me why I became a teacher in the first place, to help children believe in themselves. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that." Major Cole looked around the classroom, the charts on the wall, the faded maps, the neatly stacked books. "You have a good heart, Ms. Parker. Just remember, a teacher's words can stay with a child for life. The good ones, and the bad ones." She nodded slowly. I'll never forget that again. He smiled gently. Then I'd say you've already learned the lesson. At that moment, Ethan walked in, holding 2 paper cups of juice. Dad, I got you something from the cafeteria, he said cheerfully. Then, noticing the mood, he added softly, is everything okay? Ms. Parker wiped her eyes quickly and smiled. Everything's just fine, Ethan. Your dad and I were just talking. Ethan handed the juice to his father and looked up at his teacher. I told him you're really nice now, he said innocently. Ms. Parker laughed quietly. Thank you, Ethan. That means a lot. Major Cole glanced at his son with pride. You see, Ms. Parker, he never holds on to bitterness. That's something even adults struggle to do. Ethan tilted his head. Dad always says holding hate is like carrying heavy rocks, it just slows you down. Ms. Parker smiled through her tears. Your dad is a very wise man. Major Cole chuckled. Sometimes I think he's wiser than me. The 3 of them laughed softly, the tension finally lifting. After a few minutes, Major Cole stood. We should be going. But I'm glad we had this talk. So am I, Ms. Parker said sincerely. Thank you for understanding. He gave her a respectful nod. Thank you for caring enough to make things right. As they left, Ms. Parker watched them go, the tall soldier walking beside his small, proud son. Something about the sight filled her with peace. Later that evening, she sat by her desk at home, writing in her journal. The pages were filled with reflections and gratitude. Ethan reminded me that teaching is not about control, it's about compassion. I will never let judgment blind me again. Every child carries a story, and every story deserves to be heard. She closed the notebook, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. Outside, the sky glowed orange as the sun dipped below the trees. The world seemed a little softer, a little kinder. Somewhere out there, a boy named Ethan and his father were probably laughing together, unaware of how deeply they'd changed someone's life. Ms. Parker smiled, whispering to the empty room, "Thank you for walking into my class, Ethan. You taught me the lesson I didn't even know I needed." She turned off the light, the room glowing faintly in the sunset's last light, a symbol of forgiveness, growth, and the quiet power of truth. A week later, the morning announcements at Lincoln Elementary carried an unusual excitement. The principal's voice, usually calm and brief, sounded full of pride as it echoed through the speakers. Attention students and staff, we have a very special assembly today. Please gather in the auditorium after lunch. We'll be recognizing someone who reminded us all what true courage and honesty mean. Whispers spread like wildfire through the halls. Everyone knew who it was about, Ethan Cole, the quiet boy who once sat at the back of the class, unnoticed, underestimated, and ridiculed. But now, his name carried respect. When the bell rang after lunch, students hurried to the auditorium, buzzing with curiosity. Teachers lined up the classes, and Ms. Parker led hers quietly, her heart full of something she hadn't felt in a long time, pride mixed with gratitude. Ethan walked beside Ryan, who was now his closest friend. Their laughter felt light, easy, genuine. Gone were the days of cruel jokes and mocking whispers. As the students settled into their seats, the stage curtains opened. The principal, Mrs. Reynolds, stepped up to the microphone. Her smile was wide but emotional. Good afternoon, everyone. Today, we gather to celebrate not just academic success, but character. A lesson that has touched every heart in this school. This story began right here in our classrooms, with a boy who told the truth when no one believed him, and a teacher who was brave enough to learn from her mistake. All eyes turned to Ethan. He froze slightly in his seat as soft clapping spread through the crowd. Ms. Parker smiled warmly at him. Mrs. Reynolds continued, "In a world where it's easy to follow the crowd, this young man stood firm in truth. And because of that, he reminded us all what honesty, respect, and forgiveness truly mean." She gestured to the side. "Please welcome Major David Cole." The crowd gasped and broke into applause as Major Cole appeared on stage in his uniform, medals gleaming under the bright lights. His calm, commanding presence filled the hall instantly. He saluted the principal, then turned to face the students. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice carrying easily across the large room. "I didn't come here as a soldier today. I came as a father." The audience fell silent. "My son, Ethan, taught me something too, that courage doesn't only live on the battlefield. Sometimes, it's in a classroom, in a small voice that refuses to lie, even when everyone laughs." Ms. Parker felt a lump form in her throat. She had heard powerful speeches before, but this was different. It came from the heart. Major Cole continued, "When I walked into this school that day, I saw how easily people can forget the power of kindness. But I also saw something beautiful change. Ms. Parker, I want to thank you, not for what happened, but for how you faced it." The spotlight shifted slightly toward Ms. Parker. The audience turned to her, and she rose slowly, her eyes shining. The principal handed her the microphone. She took a deep breath. "Thank you, Major Cole. And thank you, Ethan." Her voice trembled but grew stronger. "That day changed me. I realized that teaching isn't just about lessons or grades, it's about listening, believing, and caring. Ethan reminded me of that." She turned to the audience, tears glistening in her eyes. "And I want every student here to remember this, no matter who you are, your truth matters. Never let anyone make you feel small for being honest." The auditorium erupted in applause. Some students even stood, clapping and cheering. Ethan blushed, looking down, but his father gently nudged him to stand. "Go on, son," Major Cole whispered with a proud smile. "You deserve this." Ethan hesitated, then walked shyly to the stage. The entire school watched in awe as the boy they once mocked now stood before them, not just as a student, but as a symbol of truth and courage. Mrs. Reynolds held up a small golden plaque. "Ethan Cole," she said, "on behalf of Lincoln Elementary, we present you with this certificate of honor, for your integrity, your strength, and your heart." The crowd erupted in applause again, louder this time. Ethan accepted the plaque with trembling hands. His voice was small but steady as he spoke into the microphone. "Thank you, everyone. I didn't think telling the truth would be a big deal. My dad always says it's just what you're supposed to do. But now I know, sometimes the hardest thing to do is the right thing." He paused, glancing at his classmates. "And I want to say something to Ms. Parker. I forgive you, not because you were wrong, but because you helped me show others what's right." A collective awe spread through the room. Ms. Parker wiped her eyes, her heart overwhelmed. Ethan smiled. "And to my friends, thank you for believing in me now. It means more than you think." The applause grew thunderous. Major Cole hugged his son tightly as flashes from cameras flickered across the room. Later that day, after the assembly ended, students surrounded Ethan in the hallway, shaking his hand, patting his back, and asking questions about his dad. But Ethan didn't act special, he just smiled humbly and said, "It wasn't me. It was the truth." Ryan walked beside him, grinning. "You know, dude, you're kind of a legend now." Ethan laughed. "Nah, I'm just glad everyone stopped laughing at me." Ryan nodded. "Yeah, now they're all cheering for you." Down the hall, Ms. Parker watched the two boys walk away. Her heart felt light, like the weight of the past had finally lifted. That evening, the school posted a photo on its website, Ethan holding his plaque, his father standing proudly beside him, and Ms. Parker smiling with tears in her eyes. The caption read, "Truth, courage, forgiveness. 3 lessons we'll never forget." At home, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan placed the plaque on his desk. His father stood by the doorway, arms crossed, smiling. "You proud of yourself, champ?" Major Cole asked. Ethan nodded. "Yeah. But I think I'm more proud that everyone learned something. Major Cole chuckled softly. That's my boy. He turned off the light as Ethan crawled into bed. The golden plaque glimmered faintly in the moonlight, a quiet reminder that truth, once spoken, never fades. And somewhere across town, Ms. Parker sat by her window, sipping tea, watching the stars. She whispered softly into the night, "Thank you, Ethan. You reminded us that sometimes, the smallest voice can change an entire world." The wind rustled gently outside, carrying with it the echo of applause, the warmth of forgiveness, and the unshakable power of truth. 10 years later, the halls of Lincoln Elementary were quieter, freshly painted, and filled with new faces. The once small classrooms had digital boards and bright murals of children reading, learning, and helping one another. The world had changed, but some memories never faded. Ms. Parker, now the school's vice principal, stood by the window of her office, watching students play outside. Her hair had strands of silver, but her eyes still carried the same warmth, only now, they were softer, wiser. Every day, she passed by the golden plaque hanging in the main hallway. It read, "Truth, Courage, Forgiveness." Dedicated to Ethan Cole, whose honesty changed us all. She would smile each time she saw it. Ethan's story had become part of the school's history, told to every new class at the beginning of the year. It reminded students that honesty, no matter how small, could change lives. That afternoon, Ms. Parker sat at her desk, sorting papers, when the school secretary peeked in. "Ma'am, there's someone here to see you," she said with a curious smile. "He says you might remember him." Ms. Parker looked up, puzzled. "Who is it?" The door opened, and there he was. Tall, confident, wearing a clean navy blue uniform with the emblem of the U.S. Air Force, stood Ethan Cole. His smile was the same, but his voice carried maturity. "Good afternoon, Ms. Parker," he said warmly. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Her eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth. "Ethan," she breathed. "My goodness, look at you." He laughed softly. "It's been a while." She stood, tears forming in her eyes. "A while?" "It's been 10 years, Ethan. Last I saw you, you were this little boy standing on stage, teaching the entire school about truth." He grinned. "I remember that day. My dad was so proud." Her smile softened. "How is Major Cole?" Ethan's eyes grew gentle. "He retired last year. Still training young recruits though, can't stay away from the uniform." "That sounds like him," she said, chuckling fondly. "He was one of the most honorable men I ever met." Ethan nodded, then looked around the office. "You've moved up in the world, ma'am." She smiled. "Vice Principal Parker now, yes. But I still teach sometimes. Can't quite let go of the classroom." He laughed. "You were born to teach." For a moment, they both stood quietly, the past and present meeting in a room filled with memories. Then Ms. Parker said softly, "You know, Ethan, I never stopped telling your story. Every new class hears it on their first day. Some kids don't even believe it really happened." Ethan smiled. "It did. And I'm glad you kept it alive." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, neatly folded envelope. "I actually came here for another reason." She took it, curious, and opened it carefully. Inside was a letter embossed with the Air Force emblem, and her name written in blue ink. She read the first few lines, and her eyes filled with tears again. "Dear Ms. Parker, I am writing to thank you for the lesson you taught me when I was a boy, that people can change, and that forgiveness has power. That moment in your class shaped who I became. I joined the Air Force to protect truth, just like my dad, but I never forgot the teacher who showed me what it means to face mistakes with courage. With gratitude, Senior Airman Ethan Cole." Her hands trembled slightly as she looked up at him. "Ethan, this is beautiful. You have no idea how much this means to me." He smiled gently. Actually, I do. Because you once said the same thing to me, that my truth changed your life. She laughed softly through her tears. And it did. Ethan looked around the office again, then his gaze landed on the plaque in the hallway through the open door. It's still there, he said quietly. It'll always be there, Ms. Parker replied. You gave this school its greatest lesson. He hesitated, then said, I came to ask if I could visit the students, just for a short talk, like my dad once did. Her heart warmed instantly. Ethan, I would be honored. A short while later, the announcement went through the intercom. Students, please gather in the auditorium. We have a very special guest today. The room filled quickly with excited chatter. Children whispered, wondering who it could be. Ms. Parker stood on the stage, smiling. Boys and girls, she began, 10 years ago, a student stood on the same stage and taught us about truth. Today, he's back, not as a student, but as a hero. The students gasped as Ethan walked out, wearing his Air Force uniform, the medals gleaming under the lights. The clapping was thunderous. He raised a hand to quiet them and smiled. Thank you. I used to sit right where you are now. I wasn't the smartest or the richest, but one thing I learned, never be afraid to tell the truth. Even when people laugh, even when it's hard. Because truth has power. It changes things. It changes you. The students listened, wide-eyed and silent. He continued, my teacher, Ms. Parker, once made a mistake. But instead of hiding it, she faced it. That taught me something, that being wrong doesn't make you weak. Staying wrong does. And forgiving makes you strong. The room was silent for a moment before a small boy in the front row raised his hand. Did you ever stop being scared, sir? Ethan smiled kindly. I still get scared sometimes. Everyone does. But courage isn't about never being scared, it's about doing the right thing even when you are. The audience erupted in applause again. Ms. Parker wiped a tear from her cheek, her heart swelling with pride. After the assembly, as students crowded around Ethan, asking questions and wanting autographs, Ms. Parker stood back, smiling. It was as if life had come full circle, the boy who once needed courage was now giving it to others. Later, as the crowd thinned, Ethan turned to her and said quietly, you know, I think Dad would have loved this moment. She smiled softly. He'd be proud of you, Ethan. More than words can say. As he walked toward the door, sunlight poured through the windows, casting long, warm beams across the stage, the same light that once fell on him as a child years ago. Ms. Parker watched him go, her heart full. Then she looked up at the plaque again. The words gleamed in the golden light, timeless and true. Truth. Courage. Forgiveness. She whispered to herself, he didn't just change this school. He changed me. Forever. Outside, the flag fluttered gently in the wind, and Ethan looked up at it, smiling, the same calm, humble smile he'd worn as a boy. And just like that, the story that began with laughter and doubt ended with pride and purpose, proving that sometimes, a single truth can echo across a lifetime.